Man crates. Awesome gifts for men in real wooden crates, wrapped in a cocoon of duct tape, or housed in ammo cans that are virtually indestructible. Some gifts he'll get to assemble himself. Some gifts you'll beg him to share. And some gifts are sealed inside layers of rock-solid concrete. Gifts guys love, from grilling gear to old-school video games and more. Man crates. Awesome gifts for men.
Hey folks, and good morning. Welcome into the Cam Rogers Show on this Monday morning, December 4th, 2017. I was about to say November, but we're into December, baby. There you go. Happy New Year. It's around the corner. Holiday season is here. It's a beautiful time of the year, and it's a beautiful day here in Dallas. We thank you for tuning into this live program as we take you up until 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I'm Cam Rogers. Follow me on Twitter at Mr. Rogers99. A fun show on tap for you. And as we go throughout the show, we want you commenting, throwing in your thoughts about the various topics that we discuss here today. I'm wearing my Ravens purple because I am so glad that December Joe Flacco has arrived. Played great yesterday for the Ravens in defeating the Detroit Lions. Ravens in the thick of the playoff hunt. And some fun topics to discuss here today. A little college football to start things off. I'll go through the final rankings here today. And then very soon, we will preview the college football playoff semifinals. Georgia taking on Oklahoma, and Alabama battling Clemson. James Yoder, our college football insider, coming on the program at the 15-minute mark. And then, of course, during this time in college football, there are coaching vacancies to discuss. Most notably, Florida State University. They are without a head coach as we stand because Jimbo Fisher is off to College Station. I have some worthy names that you should monitor in terms of who could fill the void there in Tallahassee. That'll be at the 30-minute mark. And then at 45, an exclusive interview with ESPN's Natta. Very excited to chat with him. He wrote that fantastic long-form story about Jerry Jones and Roger Goodell and the rift that is ongoing between those two in terms of the contract negotiations with Goodell, the Ezekiel Elliott suspension, and so much more. Looking forward to discussing all of that with Don, and many thanks to him for taking some time out of his busy schedule to come on the program. That'll be at the 45-minute mark. And we are presented by Man Crates. Head on to ChatSports or mancrates.com to see the fantastic array of Man Crates products. Guys, these are gifts that you will love. I'm talking about crates full of masculinity. Anything from barware to jerky grams to whiskey appreciation crates. To explain, they're crates that come with a crowbar that you pry open, and literally there are gifts inside meant for dudes. All the ladies out there, head on to mancrates.com. You will not regret it, and your special guy in your life will certainly love them as well. Perfect for the holiday season. So many thanks to Man Crates for sponsoring the Cam Rogers Show here today. And by the way, get the Cam Rogers Show podcast version and listen to me wherever you go. Just search the Cam Rogers Show on iTunes. Download, subscribe, leave a review. We would certainly appreciate it. Okay, the playoffs are here. College football, baby. Gotta love it. It's bowl season. It's a beautiful time of the year for many reasons, but of course, college football number one on our list out there. Am I right? We have our semifinal matchups set. Let's go through the rankings, though. The final rankings are in. 25 all the way down to number one are solidified. We'll start off with 25 through 21, of course. Boise State gets inside the top 25, and they bounced out Fresno State after Boise won the Mountain West Championship. Good for Boise. And then you got NC State there, number 24. A very solid campaign for them. Mississippi State at 23. Virginia Tech and Justin Fuente foreshadowing a potential name to monitor for all you Florida State fans out there. V-Tech at number 22 and Northwestern at number 21. A solid campaign for that team out of the Big Ten. 20 through 16, Memphis. Tough loss for them against UCF in the AAC championship game. Oklahoma State, they have their guy Gundy for the long term. They're at number 19. Washington State at 18. Mike Leach was interviewing for the Tennessee job, it seemed, with John Currie at AD. That did not last, obviously, with Currie now out. Washington State at number 18, LSU at 17, and Michigan State at 16. A lot of people have their fair share of disagreements with that one, but there they are at number 16. 15 through 11 here, TCU checking in with a 10-3 campaign. Notre Dame at 14, Stanford at 13. Stanford lost to USC in the Pac-12 championship, lost to USC twice this year. UCF 12-0, and yet they're at number 12. Did not get inside the top 10, but they will be in a New Year's Six Bowl, which is very encouraging for them. Scott Frost will coach that game, which is very interesting. You don't normally see that. Usually coaches move on, get ready with the recruiting season underway. But Frost will coach that bowl game, so it'll be cool to see the players playing hard for Mr. Frost in that final matchup. Washington at number 11, 10-2 on the year. I actually had them getting into the playoff before the season started, and a couple of losses hurt them through the season, and Washington stays outside the top 10 even after the season is all said and done. All right, 10 through 7, Miami, 10-2 on the year, lost big time against Clemson in the ACC championship game, and Charlotte was never a game, actually. It was an ACC championship debacle, blowout, destruction of Miami. Did not compete at all in that game. They were missing a lot of big-time pieces on the offensive side. The offensive line was outmatched by Clemson's defensive front and subsequently lost that game. That was the least competitive game out of the entire championship Saturday. There's Penn State at 10-2. Penn State, of course, winning the Big Ten last year, not getting into the college football playoff. Ohio State did. And you got to wonder if Nittany Lions fans are now laughing at this point because Ohio State is not in the playoff this year. And Penn State's like, ha ha, now you know how we feel. You win the Big Ten, and yet you still don't get in. So Penn State there at number 9. USC winning the Pac-12 championship at number 8, 11-2 on the year. Overall, a nice campaign for the Trojans. Sam Darnold, he didn't have the greatest of moments sometimes this year, but played pretty darn well in the Pac-12 championship game. That'll be big for his draft stock. The Auburn Tigers, 3 losses, number 7 in the final college football rankings. The Tigers could have been the first 2-loss team to get into the college football playoff. That did not happen after they lost to Georgia. Kerryon Johnson dealing with that shoulder injury throughout that game. He was the driving force behind Auburn's victory over Georgia in that first matchup at home and in this neutral site game against Georgia and the SEC championship game with Kerryon Johnson banged up. Simply outmatched were the Tigers. In that one, the Bulldogs rolled. Okay, and the final bracket, 6 through 1, Wisconsin checking in at 12-1 on the year. Ohio State, there's the point of contention, 11-2 on the season, yet they win the Big Ten. They have wins over Wisconsin. They have a win over Penn State, and there's Michigan State as well in the W column for Ohio State. But in that L column, you've got that awful, awful loss to Iowa in Iowa City. And then the Final Four. Clemson at number 1 will be taking on Alabama at number 4. Oklahoma Boomer Sooner at number 2, taking on the Georgia Bulldogs, the number 3 seed in the bracket. I want to take some time and talk about all these teams and talking about the 4 teams here, the top 4, and how they really got here. So we'll start off with number 4 in Alabama, AP preseason number 1 team. Over their first 9 games, the Tide rolled over their opponents by an average victory margin of 31.1 points. Jalen Hurts has thrown for 1,940 yards, rushed for 768, and is a finalist for the Manning Award, and has only lost 2 games in 2 years. So pretty good season for Jalen Hurts, and pretty good resume overall for him as we throw up this weigh-in for the folks at home. Why do you think Alabama is ahead of Ohio State? I'll address that later, but I want your comments flowing in now. And then the late fall for Alabama the fall season, late fall season, however you want to say it, wasn't too kind. Bama had to rally late to win at Mississippi State. Then it was hammered nationally for scheduling Mercer in Week 13. A lot of other teams had cupcake opponents as well. So Alabama wasn't the only team that got a lot of flack for that. Then it lost on the plains to Auburn in the Iron Bowl, 26-14. So Alabama didn't have an opportunity to compete in the SEC championship game. Although I will say this, Nick Saban was quite active in trying to influence the committee and really doing all he could to get the committee to believe in this Alabama team. Alabama, by the way, they will be, of course, taking on the Clemson Tigers, will be without safety Hootie Jones due to a knee injury, so that's something to monitor. They do look pretty darn healthy in their linebacking core. Got a couple of players back who really hadn't played prior to the Auburn game in the Iron Bowl, going back to the opening week. Terrell Lewis dealing with an elbow injury, Christian Miller with a bicep. They both returned in the Iron Bowl. And so it's very encouraging for that to see the linebackers getting healthy. And, of course, we'll see how they play in this big semifinal matchup. LeBron Ray, by the way, another linebacker, could return to practice after Christmas. Nick Saban very confident in that. So Alabama at number 4. The big point of contention. Should it have been Alabama? Should it have been Ohio State? Should it have been the big-time wins? Should it have been the lack of a blowout loss? The committee went with the lack of a blowout loss in the end, choosing Alabama to get into the college football playoff. It is quite clear, ladies and gentlemen, that the committee does not like two-loss teams, especially when one of those losses is against an unranked Iowa team by 31 points. All right, so Georgia, AP preseason 15, came into season with a second-year coach in Kirby Smart, second-year QB in Jacob Eason, who eventually lost the job to freshman quarterback in Jake Fromm. And by the way, Georgia lost 3 starting offensive linemen and Isaiah McKenzie. This is all going into the season. So already with some adversity, and the Georgia Bulldogs pulled off a 12-1 season, winning the SEC championship. The odds were stacked against them. Talking about the SEC East, the Bulldogs are the first representative out of the East to win the SEC since the 2008 Florida Gators, the first time for Georgia to win the SEC since 2005. And even when Georgia was on the mountaintop, if you will, when they were the number 1 team according to the College Football Committee, they slid back down after that drubbing by the hands of the Auburn Tigers. But you know, folks, revenge works in funny ways. And Georgia got their revenge in a neutral site, beating the Auburn Tigers, and there they are at number 3. Set to take on the Oklahoma Sooners at 12-1, AP preseason number 7. From a new coach, Lincoln Riley, to an absolute destruction of University of Texas El Paso, to Baker Mayfield's flag planting at Ohio State, it was quite a beginning for Oklahoma. And after some questionable performances mid-season against Baylor and that loss to Iowa State, they won their final 7 contests by an average margin of 28 points, including Saturday's 24-point victory over TCU, as to which TCU coach Gary Patterson said to the future opponents of the Sooners, quote, "Have fun with that." Yeah, I would agree, Gary. I really like this Oklahoma team. I think they absolutely blow Georgia out of the water in the semifinals game. I believe it. Baker Mayfield, I think, could be the villain of the college football playoff. And that's weird to say when you have Nick Saban and the Alabama Crimson Tide inside the field here. But, I mean, just look at kind of the missteps, shall we say, that Mayfield has made. You know, the crotch grabs and the F-bombs and the beaning his opponents during pregame warm-ups. It's possible that Baker lost some fans that, you know, were just kind of third-party observers that were like, oh, this guy's fun, but, oh, he did that stuff. Oh, maybe I shouldn't be a fan. And I think it adds to an interesting storyline that Baker Mayfield could kind of relish here. You know, this villain role, Oklahoma Sooners, high-powered offense going up against a really efficient defense in Georgia. the flag planting, etc., all that stuff. By the way, imagine if Oklahoma was going to play Ohio State in the playoff. I know that's totally hypothetical now, but that would have been fun. And so I think Baker Mayfield is going to be really the star of this playoff. And I think the Sooners get to the national championship game. Who they play is a much tougher prediction, Clemson and Alabama, but we'll talk about that later with James Yoder, our college football insider. Wrapping up how we all got here, the number 1 team, Clemson Tigers, AP preseason number 5, gutted out a 14-6 slugfest at home against Auburn in week 2. Many recall that game. The next week, Clemson defeated Lamar Jackson in Louisville on the road by scoring 47 points. 2 games later, they won by 2 touchdowns at Virginia Tech, giving the Tigers 3 wins over top 15 opponents in 4 weeks. Then the Tigers surrendered 3 touchdown passes and 440 yards to the Orange at the Carrier Dome. And many people thought, interesting, what's going on here? But it mattered little, obviously, to the committee. Clemson was dominant from there on out, leading the FBS in sacks. Look, the Tigers have an elite front line that literally manhandled Miami, stole their turnover chain, and threw it right in their face, metaphorically speaking, because the Tigers absolutely rolled over the Hurricanes. The Tigers here, albeit not as dynamic as the Watson years, I think are very alive and are kicking big time with an opportunity to defend as national champions. Now, of course, it's the rematch. It's Clemson, it's Alabama. I think that game is going to steal more headlines than Oklahoma versus Georgia per se. And so there's a lot of pressure in Dabo. There's a lot of pressure on this Clemson team coming off such an emotional victory against Miami, essentially saying Miami maybe not necessarily back. And so now they have to carry that momentum and do the same thing against Alabama. Of course, maybe not a blowout victory over Alabama. Victory would do just fine. But obviously a big-time game for the Tigers, a big-time test for Kelly Bryant. And the big thing with Kelly Bryant is he can't try to be Deshaun Watson, right? That's what everybody's saying. Don't try to be Deshaun Watson. Be Kelly Bryant. Be who you are. Don't try to be somebody else. And I think he did a good job of that against Miami. He's going to have to do it again against one of the better defenses in the nation in Alabama. Okay, so I want to harp on this big discussion with Alabama and Ohio State because Twitter went off yesterday, and we'll be showing some of the tweets throughout my little rant here. Alabama deserved to be inside the college football playoff. They did. Like it or not, this committee's choice in terms of Alabama was the right one. So, by the way, I will say this. The committee originally said there wasn't much separation between the seeds 5 through 8. And then just yesterday said that Alabama was, quote, unequivocally better than Ohio State. So in that vein, the committee kind of contradicted itself. So I think that was a misstep there by Hokut, who went on ESPN yesterday to talk about it. But I will say this. The committee simply favored Alabama's overall body of work more so than the flashy wins for Ohio State. That included, like I said, Penn State, Wisconsin, Michigan State. In the committee's view, that 31-point loss to Iowa was Ohio State's due. I understand the insanity that would ensue if the committee put in a team that lost handily to an unranked team. Plus the calls for, quote, wow, you guys bend the rules for Ohio State would be even louder. Because a lot of people say that, right? Which, you know, the cries for all that came in last year when Ohio State got into the playoff, despite not winning the Big Ten championship. Penn State won the Big Ten championship. They didn't get in. Ohio State did win the Big Ten championship and got in. Or, excuse me, did not win the Big Ten championship and got in. So maybe it's a little bit of karma here for Ohio State. I don't know. Now, let's look at the losses. It's clear Ohio State is well behind Alabama in that department. The Crimson Tide lost to a red-hot team in Auburn, the Auburn Tigers. That, by the way, crushed your number 3 seed Georgia during the season as well. Clemson lost to Syracuse on the road without a full game from Kelly Bryant. Okay, so the committee kind of looked past that. Ohio State was relatively healthy and simply got embarrassed by the Hawkeyes in Iowa City. Ladies and gentlemen, Iowa started 2 freshmen on the offensive line and was ranked around 100 offensively during that game and going into that game. The Hawkeyes won that game 55-24. That was the most points given up by the Buckeyes in 23 years. So just imagine this. Alabama losing to Vanderbilt by 31 points. They would not be in the college football playoff. So it's kind of that same vein that the committee puts so much stock into how you look during those losses compared to how you look during your victories. Because recall, it was kind of a miracle comeback for the Buckeyes against Penn State, right? Remember that? It was a big-time comeback for them to beat the Nittany Lions. Impressive, but it was tight, and they didn't look good during a good portion of that game. The victory over Wisconsin, it was solid, right? It wasn't like a blowout, right? It wasn't a crushing defeat by the Badgers. And so here's the bottom line. In terms of consistency, in terms of the season as a whole, and taking into account every single game, Alabama was the more impressive team. They were ranked either number 1 or number 2 all season long until that loss to Auburn. Ohio State didn't have that level of consistency in terms of the rankings. So it's clear throughout the year the committee favored Alabama in terms of their body of work more consistently than Ohio State. So going off of that, the committee put in the Crimson Tide. They left out Ohio State. So let's face the reality that we have. A conference championship, and I'm sure many of you know this, does not necessarily trump a really bad loss. In this case, that was proven to be right. Okay, so Ohio State winning the Big Ten didn't necessarily erase the fact that they lost to an unranked Iowa team. And so in Ohio State's instance, by the way, this was a conference championship victory over a team that the committee clearly didn't trust until late in the season in Wisconsin. It took forever for the committee to put Wisconsin inside the top 4, right? So even with the victory over Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game, the committee in their eyes were like, okay, that's great, but what about Iowa, right? It was always about, but what about Iowa? For Alabama, there wasn't that but what about this awful loss, right? There was no awful loss to Wake Forest or Vanderbilt or a lower-tier SEC team that Ohio State fans could kind of hang their hat on and say, okay, there you go. That's why we belong in the playoff, and Alabama does not. So, look, we are in the infancy of the college football playoff. We are all learning from the committee as we go through these decisions year in and year out. And it's clear that this 13-person committee favors the way in which you look during losses compared to the big-time flashy wins. And there you go. That's why the committee made the right choice in terms of selecting Alabama to get in to the college football playoff. All right, we are going to preview these matchups pretty darn soon with your college football insider, James Yoder, right here on the Cam Rogers Show. Looking forward to having him coming on. We'll talk about the matchups between the Sooners and the Bulldogs, as well as the Crimson Tide and the Tigers. It's a quick break, so stick around. Hey folks, welcome back to the Cam Rogers Show here on Chat Sports Facebook Live. We've got the college football insider, James Yoder, right here, right now. And James, all right, the rankings are behind us.
They are.
We can look ahead to the matchups now. We've got Rose Bowl action, Oklahoma, Georgia, Sugar Bowl action, Alabama, and Clemson. Let me first, before we get to these matchups, get your final thoughts. Put the nail in the coffin in terms of the committee putting Alabama in over Ohio State.
So we talked about this yesterday on our college football playoff rankings reveal show, the final rankings. We're going to find out if it's Alabama or Ohio State. Now, Tom Downey and some other discussion prior to going on the show, there was a lot of argument of, hey, this is the committee's criteria. It's head-to-head, it's conference championships, it's strength of schedule, all this different stuff. But what people seem to forget about is that would only matter if two teams were indistinguishable by their resumes. And that didn't seem to be the case, because if it was the case, then Ohio State would have got in. They've got the strength of schedule, they've got the conference championship, they've got the big wins versus Penn State versus Wisconsin. And so what it seems to me is, one, the committee and their spokesperson was not very truthful a week ago when they said 5 versus 8 are indistinguishable. That wasn't the case, because Alabama and Ohio State were in that 5-8 a week ago, and they became pretty distinguishable. When it came down to it, it sounds like it wasn't even that big of a debate. It was pretty unanimous that it was Alabama from what we've heard that's come out of the committee. Then that kind of says that, hey, even if we take into these other factors, which they didn't, Alabama still got our vote. So I think it didn't come down to be as close as people thought it would. And that loss to Iowa, I've heard it mentioned from multiple committee members who have either spoken directly or indirectly to the media in the last 20 hours or so, that loss to Iowa was really the difference. If it would have been a close one, I think Ohio State could have had a much better chance.
You know, it's interesting that you pointed that out, and I did as well, that the contradictory nature of the committee saying there's not much separation between 5 and 8, and then saying Alabama was unequivocally better, I think was a mistake.
Sure, I mean,
from a PR standpoint.
I don't know if it's in the committee's best interest to talk to people like us every week. I just don't think it makes a lot of sense, because every week something's going to change, and you're always going to get a rule that breaks what they said was their rule, right. And they're going to be like, oh, well, we forgot about this. So I don't think it makes a lot of sense for them to talk to media. They should be more generalized, and I think they should keep it a little more cloak and dagger, a little more like old USSR. You don't know who's voting, you don't know when it's coming, all of a sudden numbers just show up, and that's the voting. Yeah, exactly. I think that's what we need to do from now on.
All right, folks, before we get into the matchups here, we remind you we are indeed presented by Man Crates. These are gifts guys love. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about crates full of awesome gifts that are meant for the dudes out there. So ladies, head on to mancrates.com, because you can get your holiday shopping done in great fashion, James.
You know, Cam, I might be in it. I might get you a Man Crates or Ravens Man Crates barware setup.
I would like that.
The best gift for an NFL fan this football season. I'll tell you what, mancrates.com, barware sets.
Whiskey appreciation crate, you have golf crates, really fantastic products. So certainly check them out. The website, mancrates.com. All right, James, let's get into the semifinal matchups here. Georgia taking on Oklahoma. I said at the top of the show, this might not be close.
Well, I'm starting to agree with you more and more. It was tough for me to kind of like conceptualize coming off those championship games what these matchups would look like, but I spent a bit of time last night, bit of time this morning really kind of breaking down what these teams look like. And when I kind of compare these teams head to head, it's going to be Oklahoma all day, in my opinion. I just can't see Georgia being able to hold them below 30 points. And on the flip side, I don't see where Georgia finds 20 points. So I see at least a 2, maybe a 3-score win for Oklahoma. And when you think about what college football, and really football in general, it comes down to head coach and it comes down to quarterback a lot of instances. And now sometimes you'll say, okay, well, defense wins championships, but it really starts in those positions for me. You look at the coaching matchup, I think it is pretty, it's a push, right? No coaches as an advantage. They're both first-year, second-year coach, which is impressive itself. But when you go to quarterback, you've got Baker Mayfield, fifth-year guy, third time he's going to finish in the top 4 in the Heisman, which would be phenomenal. He's your Heisman Trophy winner. Who are you going to trust on that game day in front of the greatest scene in college football, which is the Rose Bowl? 2,000 plus miles to home. Are you going to trust Baker Mayfield, a guy who's proven he can do it, a guy who's gone on the road to places like Ohio State and to Stillwater this year and beat top 15 teams in Oklahoma State and Ohio State? Or are you going to trust Jake Fromm, who entered this season as a true freshman, not even expecting to play for another 2, maybe 3 years, because Jacob Eason was the starting quarterback and secured in that job in front of him. So I think when it comes down to that is a big deal for me. I'm surprised the point spread is so close, actually. But the only thing Georgia has to kind of hang their hat on, what they have a chance to win this game, is if they can control the clock, get Baker Mayfield and this Oklahoma offense off the field for really long stretches. Count on that 3-man running attack, and if they do, and they can have a 1.5 to 1, dominate the maybe even a 2 to 1 time advantage in the first half, you might go into halftime where they've got a 7-3 or 10-3 lead. Georgia does, and if they can continue to do that in the second half, they can win a close ball game, 21-17, 17-14. But it's got to start early. If Oklahoma scores in their first 2 drives or something like that, it is just going to start rolling. It's going to snowball from there. So I've got Oklahoma. If I'm making a score prediction right now, which it's tough to do.
You got time.
Over 4 weeks before the game, I'll go 31-17 Oklahoma in this one.
Look, Georgia and the Bulldogs, they can't get off script here. They need to stick to their game plan. They need this game to be close. They need to run the football with Sony Michel and Nick Chubb and, create some passing plays off of that with Jake Fromm. If this turns into a point-for-point shootout,
it's over.
It's done.
Yeah, there's no chance that
that's when the turnovers happen.
Can jump in there, and so it's going to come down to both teams really want to work their game plan, which is the same in every football game. But there's such contrasting styles. Your typical pro style, Nick Saban style offense versus the fun and gun and the super spread and kind of point-a-minute team of Oklahoma. So contrasting styles for sure. Really excited to see this one. I mean, I doubted this Georgia team going in. I was waiting for them to fall apart all season. And then, once we got into, late October, early November, I'm like, wow, this team is for real. And so they avenged that loss versus Auburn. So you got to give them a lot of credit no matter what the outcome of this game is.
All right, Sooners fans, throw out your Boomer Sooner in the comments section. You guys always usually come out hot on the Cam Rogers Show, so we appreciate that.
Cam, you're kind of like an honorary Oklahoma champion, a fan, and they kind of embraced you. I think it's like a mutual love fest.
It is a mutual love, I hope.
Between you and Oklahoma fans here. I love it.
All right, yeah. So I got Oklahoma as well, James. I think the Sooners roll into the national championship. Whether or not they win that, I guess all the Sooners fans have to find out in terms of my prediction. All right, the next game, the Sugar Bowl. This one is tougher to predict. Alabama, Clemson, the rematch, if you will. Look, there's going to be a chip on Alabama's shoulder, which is weird to say, but they want to prove that they belong in the playoff.
Well, so it's kind of the flip in the script of last year. Last year, everyone kind of assumed Alabama's going to repeat. They can't be stopped. They rolled through their entire schedule last year. And Clemson was coming back with this, we thought we were right there in 2015. We're going to make it happen in 16. I think Clemson thought about that game all year last year. They probably had a little, sign. I believe they actually did have a sign in their locker room reminding them of the score of the 2015 national championship game. And so you flip the script this year. Alabama in this game, if they're going to have a chance to win it all, which, by the way, it probably will happen at this point. Alabama just always seems to be in there. Why not do it against Clemson? The team you played, I was saying this yesterday, two of probably the top 5 college football bowl, maybe even national championship games in my lifetime, right, were the last 2 versus these 2 teams. So I think from a fan interest standpoint, nationally, even if you don't have a dog in the fight here, this is a game that everyone's going to want to watch just because of the chess match between the 2 coaches over the last year, the high level of quarterback play, and Clemson has kind of continued that play, even though they've lost their generational talent in Deshaun Watson. So this game is more interesting for me than the prior one, than the Rose Bowl, because I think Clemson, on paper, should win this game. I do think they are probably more talented, more experienced at almost every position you want to be focused on in this game. But you still have Nick Saban, and when push comes to shove with Nick Saban, he is the best small game, big game, whatever game coach you have in college football. He's the best guy, and rarely does anyone ever beat Nick Saban in back-to-back years. I'm going to go look. I think it's only happened once in the time he's been at Ole Miss, if I was correct in looking this morning, or in the time he's been at Alabama, and that was to Ole Miss back-to-back years. So I think this one's going to be closer than expected. I think on paper, if these just said team 1, team 2, I would say Clemson's going to win by 2 or 3 scores. But with Nick Saban, with his ability to prepare this team over a 4-week period to face this opponent that he's faced twice, it's almost like facing a rival at this point.
It's a lot of tape to look at.
They have faced each other 2 straight years. Neither team is going to drastically change what they do on offense or defense. So Nick Saban's going to have them prepared. I wouldn't be surprised if Alabama ended up winning this game. But as such, I'm going to go with a Clemson score. I made a prediction yesterday, which I don't actually remember, but I'm going to kind of channel back into my memory. I'm going to go similar score for the winning team in Clemson. 31 seems like a good number. Alabama 23. That's my prediction at this point. Going to be a close game. Should be anybody's game in the fourth quarter, but I've got Clemson in this one, given just the body of work I've seen from them this season.
This is so difficult. Clemson's defensive front may be the best collective positional group in all of college football. Then you have the Saban factor on the other side, James, and you're almost like talking me into Alabama because Saban has so much time to prepare, because he has seen these Tigers so many times, and the fact that I think Alabama has the mental edge here. I want to ask you this before I let you go, James. The coaching duel between Sweeney and Saban, is that a push too, like the other game?
Gosh, you wouldn't think so. If you compare Nick Saban, and for some people who maybe don't pay attention to college football as much as we do, Nick Saban is the Michael Jordan of college football. He is the greatest ever, Cam. There is no question about that anymore. He is the best coach of all time. But Sweeney is kind of turning into, I don't know, is he the LeBron or Kobe of coaching?
Yeah.
I do think he now has surpassed Urban Meyer, at least this stamp in time, as the number 2 coach in college football. It might be 2 and 2B with Urban Meyer, but to go to the playoff 3 straight years, to lose a guy like Deshaun Watson and still make it back as the number 1 seed, it's not like they squeaked in there like Alabama did at the last minute, I think speaks to the level of recruiting and coaching they've got on there. This Clemson program is rolling, so I don't want to call it a push, but it's like the scales of coaching have just tilted ever so slightly in Alabama's favor, but it is not anywhere near a mismatch by any means. These guys are at the top of their game. This is the best coaching matchup we're going to see this year in college football, and I think college football fans have just been treated to 4 straight years. You're basically seeing Alabama go up against the best other coach in college football that year. 3 years ago, we saw him versus Urban Meyer in the semifinal, which was a matchup of Titans, of the likes we've never seen in college football at that time in the playoff. And then here we've got it 3 straight years with Clemson, and 2 of the guys who have elevated themselves to the top of the game.
It's certainly going to be a fun one for sure. James Yoder, your college football insider, coming on the program. James, appreciate it, sir.
Thanks a lot.
All right, there you have it. Alabama taking on Clemson, and Georgia battling Oklahoma. All you folks watching the program right now, throw in your score predictions, and I'll be taking a look. I'll be tracking them in the comments section. Sticking with college football now, but we're talking about a head coaching vacancy out there in Tallahassee, Florida. Yeah, that's right, Florida State. Who should they hire next? We have a poll for all you folks out there. Throw in the comments, who do you think should be the next head coach for the Seminoles? I have some names to monitor for sure. So we'll start off with one that is probably stealing the most headlines right now and is in most of the research that I have found. And that is one Willie Taggart of the University of Oregon, led the Ducks to a 7-5 finish this year, coached USF from 2013 to 2016, a native of Florida. And by the way, the Ducks lost their starting quarterback mid-season, so Willie Taggart doing a nice job facing that adversity, began his head coaching career where he played quarterback Western Kentucky. Took the Hilltoppers from 2-10 to 7-5 and 7-5 and winning 14 of his final 20 games there, and then upset Kentucky. Remember, that recruiting set up good teams there for Petrino and Brom. So Willie Taggart has pretty good history overall. He's not a splashy name, not necessarily a name that's going to get people excited in Tallahassee, but I think he is a quality pickup. And, of course, you got FSU and Oregon. They're both Nike schools. You can look at that. Taggart is just a $3 million buyout, which isn't too bad at all. And turning around the USF program is something that I'm really looking at. You look at win totals of 2, 4, then 8, and then 10, in that order from 2013 to 2016 before being hired by Oregon. That's like a turnaround CEO. You know what a turnaround CEO is? When somebody hires a CEO to a company to like turn around the company and make it better. Willie Taggart could be that turnaround CEO for Florida State. Florida State's not far behind from becoming a legit power yet again. So Willie Taggart is our guy at number 1 in terms of the Florida State hot board here. Let's go to the second name we should be watching out for, Justin Fuente. Virginia Tech head coach, turned around Memphis from a losing program to one that won 10 and 9 games in 2014 and 2015 respectively. Fuente was also a quarterback as a player. You can look to that. His buyout is $6 million before December 15th. It then dips to $5 million after that. Whether or not he goes somewhere else, who knows? Or maybe Florida State could wait a little bit and Fuente would be cheaper. Virginia Tech to Florida State I think would be a fantastic and lucrative jump for Fuente, although he has expressed content with Blacksburg. I think everybody has a price, especially in this opportunity here for Fuente to make a big-time jump in terms of program stature, right? Going from the Hokies to the Seminoles, I think would be a big-time move. By the way, Fuente does have 4 Floridians committed to Virginia Tech, so he does have some experience recruiting in the Sunshine State. So Fuente, a guy to watch out for all you Florida State fans out there. Next name to look at, Jeff Brom, head coach of Purdue, led the Boilermakers to first bowl season in 5 years. Turned down the Tennessee coaching offer after all of that debacle, so he's still looking perhaps. FSU, I think, is way ahead of Tennessee in terms of coaching desirability. So if FSU gives Brom a call, I think Brom will certainly be more inclined to listen than, say, the Tennessee Volunteers calling and asking his thoughts. Began his head coaching career by leading the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers to 8, 12, and 10 win seasons. Experience working under Bobby Petrino at Louisville as well when he was the offensive coordinator there. Does have some Southeast ties now. He was the Florida Atlantic's quarterback coach in 2009, UAB offensive coordinator coach, a quarterback coach as well in 2012. I think he's one of the great offensive minds in college football, to be honest with you. Not many people talk about that. But Purdue was a pretty darn good offense this year, much better than the year before. Just talking about, it's all relative, of course, but talking about the difference between the Boilermakers last year to this year, I think was certainly notable. And Jeff Brom going bowling, why not? He could be kind of a turnaround candidate there for Florida State. All right, I had to throw this name in. Lane Kiffin, Florida Atlantic University. Why the heck not? Why not? Took the Owls to a Conference USA championship and one easy pick, I think, for a promotion to a Power 5 team. Made a name for himself. You go back to the days as the offensive coordinator at USC during the Leinart Bush days and turned that into a head coaching job for the Oakland Raiders at just 31. Didn't work out too great, but still, that's notable. Led the Owls to a nice record this season, and that was after the Owls went 3-9 this year, and of course that Conference USA championship. He may be the best offensive mind in all of college football. I think he would bring a ton of excitement to Tallahassee, which essentially it needs at this point after taking a gut punch from Jimbo Fisher leaving Florida State. Let's not forget that. A lot of fans feel betrayed, even players. Francois took to Twitter to talk about that. And so I think, a Lane Kiffin could bring a ton of energy to this football team, could bring a ton of energy to the campus in general, heck, the state, to be honest with you, because it's obviously a big-time jump for the coach himself, going from Florida Atlantic to a Power 5 team. I think, honestly, the social media presence alone may actually bring Floridians to him, talking about potential Floridian recruits there. Because, look, the way in which Lane Kiffin trolls on social media, I think, is a good way to maybe get millennials on board. There's an opportunity there for potential recruits to see Lane Kiffin on Twitter and basically say, this guy's pretty cool. He's unconventional. I can kind of get on board with this. So 44-24 head coaching record overall. Lane Kiffin, I think, is a name to monitor. And then finally, and bear with me with this one, just throwing it out there, Mark Stoops, head coach of the Kentucky Wildcats, was defensive coordinator at Florida State, of course, under Jimbo Fisher from 2010 to 2012 before heading to Lexington. A record at UK, not all that inspiring, 26 of 35. So again, this is kind of a big jump here in terms of the potentiality of Stoops going to Florida State. I don't think Florida State actually gives him a call unless desperation mode comes into play. And so I think he is a little unproven, but trending in the right direction. You look at the records for the Wildcats: 2-10, then 5-7, 5-7, 7-5, 7-5. I think he's likely a year away from making any sort of move. But, I thought maybe, Stoops could make some sense for Florida State if they get desperate. They lose some of the guys that they have at the top of their list. All right, there's your Florida State hot board, ladies and gentlemen, here on the Cam Rogers Show. We're going to hit a quick break. Coming up on the other side, we have Don Natta of ESPN. We're going to talk about the civil war that is ongoing between Jerry Jones and Roger Goodell. Stick around. It's the Cam Rogers Show. Hey folks, welcome back to the Cam Rogers Show here on Chat Sports Facebook Live. Right now we have ESPN investigative reporter Don Natta on the program. He of course broke the story about the ongoing civil war between Jerry Jones and Roger Goodell. Don, thanks so much for jumping on the program. It really does mean a lot. How are we doing?
Doing great, Cam. How are you doing today?
Doing fantastic. It is an awesome Monday indeed, and I do want to start off, Don, with the awesome piece that you wrote recently on ESPN.com, of course, went out on ESPN Magazine just recently as well, and this surrounding the battle between Jerry Jones and Roger Goodell. And I want to ask you this just right off the top. What were your initial reactions among hearing the discord among the NFL leadership?
Well, I have to say that I was surprised at how contentious it got, how quickly it got contentious. We knew that this had been Roger Goodell's next contract had been an issue that had been boiling beneath the surface for a long time. I mean, back at the winter meetings in March in Phoenix that I attended with my colleague Seth Wickersham, we know that Jerry Jones raised concerns about Roger Goodell's next contract. But it really wasn't until November that we heard this threat that Jerry Jones made with the compensation committee that he was going to sue his fellow owners if Goodell's contract went forward. And then, of course, the money quote that we got for our story that you made reference to, Cam, where Jerry Jones told Roger Goodell back in August when Goodell informed him that Ezekiel Elliott was going to be suspended for 6 games. And Jones said, "I'm going to come after you with everything I have," and then mentioned Deflategate and said, "If you think Bob Kraft came after you hard, Bob Kraft is an expletive compared to what I'm going to do." Seth and I were quite surprised when our reporting showed that. We got that right before our deadline on that piece. And obviously that just shows the level of discord between Jerry Jones and Roger Goodell, but also among all the owners. This is a very contentious issue, one of the most contentious issues we've seen among the membership in many years.
It was certainly a bombshell report, Don, and when it came out, I spent like a good 30 minutes on the story on this program here because it was just so interesting. And of course, like you said, you reported that Goodell indicated to Jones that Ezekiel Elliott wouldn't be suspended. So what went down between then and then when Ezekiel Elliott actually did get suspended? For example, why did Roger Goodell change his mind?
Well, right. That's really the heart of the story, Cam. You put your finger on it. Back in May, right before the timing here and the context is really interesting. So back in May, there's a phone conversation between Jerry Jones and Roger Goodell. And according to Jones, he came away from that conversation feeling as if Goodell convinced him and basically told him Ezekiel Elliott was not going to be suspended at all for these domestic violence allegations. And Jones was telling people that. He was telling family members that in Texas. He was telling people, he's telling the public that. When the Cowboys training camp opened up in Oxnard, California in July, Jones said, nothing is going to happen here. Ezekiel Elliott's not going to miss a single game. Well, what happened in the intervening period is Roger Goodell sat at the league office in June. And, well, two things happened. Let me back up a second. In the late May in Chicago, the owners voted unanimously to give Roger Goodell a contract extension. So Jerry Jones voted then to give Roger Goodell a mammoth contract extension. Then in June, Goodell sits down at the league office in New York, and he has 4 domestic violence experts there who look at all the evidence that's been compiled by Lisa Friel, one of the top investigators for the NFL. And it's after that session that Goodell decides that, in fact, Ezekiel Elliott is going to be suspended for 6 games. And so it's in August, after Jones is inducted into the Hall of Fame, that Roger Goodell informs Jones of the 6-game suspension, and that's when Jerry Jones goes ballistic, because he had believed all summer long that Roger Goodell had told him back in May that there'd be no suspension.
It's absolutely unbelievable, and I think I know the answer to this question when I asked this, Don, but would you say that this complete 180 by Goodell was essentially the driving force behind Jones's disdain for the commissioner right now?
Well, I think it's a big part of it, Cam, and it's definitely was a tipping point in the relationship between Jones and Goodell. There's no question about that. But to be fair to Jones, he has also expressed concerns behind closed doors among the other owners, going back to that winter meeting that I made mention of in March, about his concerns about the business metrics of the NFL going south. And as we all know, TV ratings are down for the second consecutive year. They're down 20 to 25% from their highs of 2015 this fall. NFL merchandise sales are down dramatically. The sponsors are very skittish over this players kneeling during the anthem controversy. And so there's a lot of business metrics that have gone south on the NFL rapidly, and Jones is concerned about that. Goodell's contract is not up until March of 2019. So he still has about 16, 17 months left. And Jones has said to his fellow owners, he's also said publicly in recent weeks, let's slow this train down. We do not have to give him a 5-year contract extension right now. And let's take a look at this and reassess, during the winter, during the off season, and figure out whether or not Roger Goodell is our guy. But there's no question, Cam, that the Ezekiel Elliott suspension and what Jerry Jones saw as a betrayal of trust by Roger Goodell is the main reason why he's been so vocal against Goodell in recent months.
And of course, Don, there's a lot of talk, and there has been talk throughout the season, that Jones is ready to file a lawsuit against the NFL if he's continually left in the dark about Goodell's compensation negotiations. So with that, how likely is that actually to happen?
I don't think it's that likely anymore. If you had asked me that question, Cam, a few weeks ago, I would have said maybe a 50-50 chance. This was a threat that Jerry Jones made to the compensation committee members. There's 6 owners who are on the compensation committee, and they're charged with negotiating directly with Goodell for his contract and for his compensation. Jones basically muscled his way onto that committee. It's kind of funny. And he became the 7th member. He called himself the ombudsman of the committee. And during a conference call with that committee, which is chaired, by the way, by Arthur Blank, the owner of the Falcons, Jones threatened his fellow owners of that committee, members of that committee, because he felt he was being kept in the dark and there wasn't enough transparency about the negotiations going on with Goodell. He also felt, quite candidly, Cam, that there was just too much money that the committee was thinking of paying Goodell. Goodell made an average of $42 million a year in the last 5 years. And his people asked for nearly $50 million in the next contract, including the use of a private jet, unlimited health care, limitless health care basically for the rest of his life and his family's life. These things to Jerry Jones and by the way, to some other owners too, is asking a lot at a time when the NFL is struggling, is certainly down, double digits, as I said, in TV ratings. And these other business metrics are very concerning for some of these owners. They're like, well, why does Goodell deserve, these mammoth increases? And that's Jones's biggest concern. But when he made that threat about that lawsuit, Cam, he basically got kicked off the committee by Arthur Blank and the other members. I don't think that's likely anymore. I think that was a threat that Jones made, and I think they've buried that hatchet somewhat as they're going into this meeting next week. There'll be an owners meeting in Irving, Texas next week, and then they're going to really hash this out behind closed doors, all 32 owners, of what to do about Goodell's contract.
And there's no doubt about that. We will be monitoring those meetings. Don, it seems like you are one of the media people out there that know Jerry Jones very well. You wrote a profile about him a few years ago, and in that profile, he was praising Goodell. Now we have turmoil, and Jerry is a fighter and all that. So do you see this civil war being more of a marathon rather than a sprint?
Oh, I think it's definitely a marathon. I think things have changed for good between Jerry Jones and Roger Goodell. I've been asked a number of times since our story came out, the question of whether or not this is just some posturing. It's typical in negotiations that there's some saber rattling on both sides. Jerry Jones is a pretty astute businessman, as we all know, maybe the most astute businessman among the owners in the history of the NFL. But I don't think that's the case. I think that Jerry Jones legitimately feels that Goodell has let down the members on a number of issues, not just on the Ezekiel Elliott issue. I think he's thinking beyond Goodell for new leadership. And so I do think this is a marathon. I think it's playing out in the context of this contract, but I think there'll be some very blunt discussions next week in Irving, Texas, led by Jones, to really look potentially beyond Roger Goodell as a commissioner. That doesn't mean he's not going to get re-upped, by the way. He may get re-upped, but maybe not for 5 years. Maybe we'll look at only a 2 or 3 year extension that he'll get. And Goodell himself, to be fair to Roger Goodell, has said, look, you can hang around these jobs too long. That may be posturing a little bit on his part as well as part of this negotiation. But he has also indicated he's 58. He's been in the NFL for 36 years. It's the only job he's ever held. And so he's made noises that this, is not necessarily something he'll be doing forever either. So I really think this is a marathon. It's a great question. I think we're looking at a marathon.
Well, you hinted at it, Don. You mentioned that, it was a complete betrayal of the trust between Jerry Jones and Roger Goodell. And it seems to me that this isn't your typical office politics, your typical water cooler disagreement. This seems to be a true personal, damaging kind of event here. So you are essentially saying, Don, in what I am hearing, that Jones and Goodell may never repair this relationship?
I don't think so. Now, they might, Cam. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I don't think so. I think, look, the thing that really, I think, bothered Jones the most and is the fact that he was out there publicly all summer in Oxnard, California, as I said, at the Cowboys training camp, and also in Canton, Ohio, when Jones was inducted into the Hall of Fame in early August, telling the public, telling the press repeatedly, there is nothing to these domestic violence charges. I know that Ezekiel Elliott is going to be cleared. And Jones believes the reason he felt that way is an assurance given to him by Roger Goodell back in May during a phone conversation. So to have that turnaround occur in early August and to lose his star running back for 6 games, and we've seen what's happened to the Cowboys offense since Ezekiel Elliott has not been on the team. I mean, they're struggling at 6-6, and we'll see what happens in these final 4 games, but they're quite likely not going to make the playoffs. And Jerry Jones, as I found out in that profile that you mentioned 3 years ago, the thing that he wants the most is to win a Super Bowl, again, without Jimmy Johnson, without the help of Jimmy Johnson. It's for his legacy. And Jones is now 75 years old, and Roger Goodell, in Jones's view, stood in the way of that in a way that was not honest and not a straight shooting way. And that's how Jones believes he behaves in business. And so, no, I think more likely than not, their relationship will never be repaired.
Don Natta, ladies and gentlemen. Don, fantastic reporting. It was a great read. Everybody check it out. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the best in the business. Don, appreciate you carving out some time on the show and wishing you all the best.
Thanks, Cam. Same to you.
All right, take care. Many thanks to Don for coming on the Cam Rogers Show here on Chat Sports Facebook Live. Don't worry, we'll cut it. We'll put it up on YouTube and on the podcast as well if you missed portion of the interview. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that will do it for me. Follow me on Twitter at Mr. Rogers99. Again, download the podcast version. Just search the Cam Rogers Show on iTunes. I'll see you back here at 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday. Take care, everybody.